This is the best
Do you hear me?
of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
It's been a while since we all settled in on these friendly confines. A lot of changes, certainly around college football and in the SEC. We'll cover all of that for you. But regardless, we hope everybody had a nice month of July. We are on the final day of July, and tomorrow August comes, and with that, certainly a great deal of college football news. Let's begin with the absolute latest. Deshaun Hand's arrest puts Nick Saban in another uncomfortable position. It's the headline in the Sporting News. A lot of controversy, but who is Deshaun Hand? Before we get too deep into the weeds, one of the top players in the 2014 draft. He is a preseason first-team All-American, one of 10 players from Alabama, 7 career sacks, and certainly one of the keys to Alabama's defense. Also a very good record off the field, an academic all-SEC player. So that story broke Saturday morning, and more information coming out as we speak, and we'll share all of that with you as we move throughout the next 4 hours. According to Tide Sports, Aaron Suttles, who will join us a little bit later on, Deshaun was actually asleep in his car when he was arrested. He was, according to this report, in a parked car and not driving at the time. That is very confusing. I am not an expert on city and county and state law in the state of Alabama, but according to the state law, he was deemed to be in quote-unquote constructive possession of the vehicle. I guess if you're in the vehicle and it's yours and you have the keys to it, even though you weren't driving and the vehicle was parked, you were the man. And according to the Tuscaloosa police, he was arrested and charged with DUI. We'll get more on that a little bit later with Aaron Suttles. Bama will start camp on Thursday, one of the latest SEC schools to start. Georgia Vandy on the field this afternoon. Kentucky, South Carolina, and Tennessee already underway. And we'll see more and more as the week goes on. LSU today, Ole Miss with a new head coach. If you left us a couple weeks ago, you probably had not heard that news. Bama, as I mentioned, and A&M at the end of the week. Kirby Smart and the Dogs on the field today. Many unresolved questions. And we are anxious to see what the Dogs are going to look like since they're the pick to win the SEC East.
Offense, obviously throwing the ball more efficient is a big goal of ours, because I think if you throw the ball efficiently, you'll be able to run the ball with the backs we got. When you can't throw the ball, it makes it hard. It doesn't matter who your backs are. And we're going to have a lot of shuffling across the offensive line throughout camp. I'm excited about the opportunity for those guys. I think they're up to the challenge. I think it's going to be a really key, integral part for our success to figure out who are the best 8, who are the best 10, how many do we have that can play winning football on the offensive line? And you can't find that out on day 1, guys. You can't find it out on day 2 because you still got shorts on. But you start seeing who can learn and who's really serious about it early on.
Kirby Smart talking earlier today in Athens. So what are we going to do on our first day back from summer vacation? I'm about to tell you. Kevin Skarbinski, some critical words in his newspaper over the weekend about Deshaun Hand. Armin Katayan, who once did a 60 Minutes piece on Nick Saban. Dennis Dodd, a little bit later on who could end up replacing Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss. Bud Elliott with Tomahawk Nation. And Aaron Suttles on the scoop that he just had, the new update on what exactly was going on with Deshaun Hand. But first, your phone calls at 855-242-7285. Randy's back. The whole gang is back. Welcome back, Randy. Welcome back to all of you. It's been fun, and it's been a good getaway, but we're glad you were back. We were actually on the radio a week before last when we spent the 4 hours on that Friday talking about Hugh Freeze's firing at Ole Miss. That will certainly be a topic that we delve into a little bit more today. Since that came out late on that Thursday night, a lot more has been revealed, and none of it good for Hugh Freeze. 855-242-7285. That is our number here on this Monday afternoon, the final day of July. Let's check in with Clarence first off in Atlanta. Hello, Clarence. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon to you, Paul. Hey, what up, man? Welcome back, Paul.
Good to have you back, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you all need your vacation, man, but it's not like this show being off for 2 weeks, man. It was not.
Yeah, listen, if it was up to us, we would never be off, but not up to us.
Right, yeah. I mean, I don't mind seeing the reviews of the team's history, but it's like when you have to see a guy like I am, as a Georgia guy, but I've seen all the other SEC games anyway, so it's like, okay, let's get on back to the radio show and to this year's football, but I want to comment on Nick Saban, Paul, and it's the Deshaun Hand situation. Like, I've heard people on this network, Paul, and ESPN, around a lot of networks in college football that was very hard to me on Jimbo Fisher. And they talk about, well, he had a lack of discipline and all this, and they attacked Urban Meyer. And I just think just because you're the greatest football coach of all time, like Nick Saban, I just think he has got a pass because his discipline hasn't been no much better than Jimbo Fisher's or any other great coach when it comes to elite players and starters, because he has given them passes just as much as Urban Meyer and Jimbo Fisher. And I felt like for many years they were trying to use those two guys and these other coaches as the cornerstone, where they only care about winning. And Nick Saban does all discipline, and that hasn't been. Is not going to get suspended for this Florida State game.
Well, no, he's not, and I think there obviously could be some mitigating circumstances, regardless of what he was or was not doing in this car. I would say from a legal sense, being under the influence and sleeping in your car is better than driving in your car, but you still put yourself in harm's way. But I think your point about Saban overall is correct. Very few people want to judge him. If it's Jimbo Fisher or Urban Meyer, most of us will look at it objectively. With Nick Saban, it's always, well, he knows best. Well, he is the best coach in college football, but he makes mistakes like I do and like you do.
Right, Paul, and I appreciate, and I give you the most respect out of anybody, Paul, because you don't care throwing punches at anybody. And there's a lot of, I'll just say cowards in the media, in my opinion, these networks, who want to just take shots, easy at Jimbo Fisher.
But Clarence, you have fan bases out there, whether it's the Dallas Cowboys, whether it's the Patriots, whether it's Alabama, whether it's Florida. That doesn't matter. That fan base only looks at what their coach does, and they blindly support him no matter what he says, no matter what he does. And most of the time, that individual is probably correct. But mistakes are made, and I do think you have to look at things on an individual basis. And I would also say that the head coach is in a better position to judge than I am or you are, but I try to look at it objectively. He is looking at it in terms of his team, and sometimes you do have to send a message. And I think there have been plenty of people out there who have wondered about. And I said it to his face last year, and he blew up. Because he does not like to. Bullies don't like to be criticized. But in the end, I thought he was wrong then. I thought when I heard this story that the player should be suspended. I don't know what, I'm still not sure that much has changed. He was still in a car. He was still in a position that is not the embodiment of a leader on a college football team.
And I mean, look at Paul. I mean, you know my team is, but I think I'll be a hypocrite if Paul, you know me, and I just defend my players here at Georgia acting a fool, doing nothing, my coach giving them a pass, but then I come on this show and say, well, look at Miami, look at Florida State. That's an undisciplined program. Like, what kind of hypocrite would I be if I just look the other way, if I see nothing but suspension, and my players here at Georgia not doing what they're supposed to do, but then I want to target somebody else just because I don't like them at all or I don't like their head coach. And I just think that's been a problem for a long time regarding no offense, Nick Saban, because Urban Meyer, you was there, Paul. Urban Meyer's been very scrutinized. Jimbo Fisher's been very scrutinized. There's been other coaches been scrutinized.
Listen, my philosophy, Clarence, is that no one really should be above anything. I've been criticized in the last week for believing in Hugh Freeze. Well, you know what? I did. I sat in his office and he talked about his faith and he talked about what he's overcome, and I sat there and believed him. I believed him not because of one time, but I believed him over a series of conversations over a series of years. In the end, was my judgment incorrect? Yeah, I would say it was. Hugh Freeze was not the person I thought he was. I don't know who he is, frankly. And I don't think he's done a very good job of explaining himself since he was fired. But I do know how it's going to end up for him, and it's going to be terrible. And he will be thrown under the bus, and he'll be the scapegoat. And in the end, all the fans who loved him and supported him and the people like me who believed in him will all look at him and as an outcast, because that's what he's going to become based on the tracks that he left.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Kevin Skarbinski is with us too, the award-winning columnist for many, many years at Birmingham News, and now as well as that AL.com over the weekend, opined about the Deshaun Hand arrest. We are learning more about that today from a new report. And, Kevin, always good to catch up with you. I read your column. I thought you made some great points. And I am curious, based on what we're hearing now, that Deshaun Hand was asleep in the car. First of all, it's a little confusing to me how you get arrested and charged with DUI. But then again, I'm not a DUI lawyer. Can you help us better understand what this is all about?
Well, yeah, Paul, I think we're all learning about the phrase actual physical control of a vehicle and what it means from a legal standpoint. According to TideSports.com, Deshaun Hand was behind the wheel of his car. The car was in park, but it was running in a parking lot, and that's when he was arrested for DUI. And I've read the state of Alabama statute on DUI, and it uses that phrase, actual physical control of a vehicle. And apparently if you are even sleeping in your car, but the keys are in the car, certainly the keys are in the ignition and the car is running, that appears to fit the definition of you being in physical control of your vehicle. And obviously, Paul, being asleep behind the wheel with the car in park is, if you are intoxicated by the legal definition, then clearly that's better than the car being in drive and you driving while being intoxicated. I don't know. That may be a legal splitting of hairs. That may make things better for Deshaun Hand when it comes to him dealing with the legal system. I don't know what effect that will have on Nick Saban. I think that's what a lot of your listeners and my audience want to know.
Yeah, and certainly reaction. I don't need to tell you about reaction of Alabama fans. You live there. But fans hear one thing and certainly like to be dismissive of outside noise. What are you sensing after your column, and what are you sensing today from fans in Alabama?
Well, fans all turn into defense attorneys when a player for their favorite team is accused of anything, and they're immediately looking for loopholes and reasons why that person should not be held accountable for his actions. In this case, the default position in this state for 10 years has been Nick Saban knows what he's doing, and you dare not question him. And I would say when it comes to football, he's proven that he is the best at what he does. And while that doesn't mean you can't question him, he's not the Pope. He's not infallible even in matters of football, but he's pretty darn good at what he does as a football coach. When it comes to his record as a disciplinarian, you could point to, and I did this research on Saturday before that column, this is the sixth Alabama football player to be arrested, in the seventh instance of an Alabama football player being arrested for DUI in the last 4 years. I don't know how that compares to other programs. I don't know how that compares to the University of Alabama as a college or other colleges. That appears to me to be too many. So you could question whether what Nick Saban is doing on that front is working.
Yeah, and certainly he has been. I know this news does not get into the state of Alabama, but you do read about things outside. I mean, he has been almost predictably ridiculed by a number of cynics every time one of these episodes occur, whether it's a player driving down the highway with the key in the ignition or sitting in a parking lot with the key in the ignition. Do you think that is deserved?
Well, there appears to be an inconsistency in that of those previous players who were arrested for DUI, a couple of them missed a game, and some of them did not. The problem in trying to judge whether he's doing the right thing is we don't know all the details. We don't know the prior history of behavior of all of these players, and I would caution fans, because they don't either. And you're hearing a lot of this with Deshaun Hand. Well, he hasn't done anything wrong up to this point. Well, as far as you know, and I'm not saying he has, but I'm saying we don't know all the background. We don't know if they have any priors in terms of missteps off the field, if they've been in Nick Saban's doghouse for any reason up to this point. So those are all factors that Nick Saban and any coach take into account before they hand down discipline, and that's why I think Nick Saban is smart. And a lot of coaches do this too, Paul. They don't make hard and fast rules. I think if you found guilty of DUI, you should sit at least one game. I think that should be a hard and fast rule. I think that offense is far too serious, it's far too common, and it's taken far too lightly in this society, not just in college football. But that's me. I'm not coaching a college football team. I'm not getting paid $7 million a year to coach one. I think that should be a hard and fast rule. But coaches, and this is not exclusive to Nick Saban, maybe are smarter than that or more savvy than that, and they don't set down hard and fast rules, so they can make nuanced judgments and talk about changing behavior, and discipline is not about punishment. And by the way, that's become a common mantra among Alabama fans since Nick Saban landed on that line some time ago. Discipline is not just about punishment, it's about changing behavior. It's amazing how often you hear that in this state.
Well, all that is great, Kevin, but I'm going back to Deshaun Hand from what we know today, and this is just a report by a good reporter, but still, this information was not known the other day that Deshaun Hand was asleep in his car when Nick Saban did make some judgment, did he not? He talked about the behavior, and then he added he did not condone the behavior, but then he added, like he always does, that we're still trying to gather information. Is that just to give him cover on both ends?
I think part of it was. I think part of it's simply the truth, that at that point he probably was gathering information to ultimately make his decision. I just think, Paul, and I think he's guilty of this, and look, he's the loudest voice in college football. If Nick Saban were to stand up at a press conference Thursday when they start fall camp and say to the world, okay, I've had enough of this. From now on, if you are found guilty of DUI in my program, you will sit the next football game. I think that would send a powerful message that no one else in college football can send quite like he could. I don't expect him to do that.
I want to ask you, broadening this a little bit to fans and media alike, because a lot of people in our profession felt like they knew the real Hugh Freeze until a week and a half ago. I did not. How difficult is it, Kevin, getting doing what you do and doing what all of us do, looking at coaches? We always have to. I mean, I've had major coaches, as I know you have, lie straight to your face, and once they do that, it's difficult to believe them again. In Hugh Freeze's case, I always felt like he was telling the truth. It turned out that he probably wasn't. How do you square that in the many years that you've covered teams and tried to make judgments and decisions and offer opinions based on these people?
Well, it makes you cynical, Paul. It certainly does. And as you said, I've had coaches, players, administrators look me in the eye, people that I had trusted up to a point, and tell me a flat-out lie. I didn't know it was a lie at the time, but I learned it later, and certainly that changes your relationship with not only that individual, it changes your relationship with everyone in the profession. And I have gone out of my way, the longer I've been in this business, the older I've gotten, I've gone out of my way to make the distinction between an individual as a coach or a player and a person. Those are very different things. And just because you are very good at coaching football or playing football, that has no bearing on your standing as a human being. You can be a great person and a great coach, a great person and a great player. But the two don't always go together. We've seen it far too often. And we've seen it in some of us, and I'm sure I know you fall into this category as well. Some of us have seen it about people, and maybe it's never gone public. But it colors our judgment. It colors our opinion of those people because we may know things that the general public doesn't about certain individuals who are portrayed as, quote-unquote, good guys.
No doubt. Well, Kevin, we'll continue watching this story. I'm sure you'll continue hearing from your many, many fans supporting you. And always great.
An email just popped in as you spoke, Paul.
I have no doubt. Well, thank you very much for your time. We'll talk, I hope, very soon.
Thanks, Paul. Have a good
stuff.
day.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
You're not worth a deal.
It was BYOG, bring your own guts.
This is the best
Do you hear me?
of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Our next guest has been missing for too long. He is Armin Katayan, the 60 Minutes contributing correspondent. It was a couple of years ago they did that unforgettable piece on Nick Saban. And it was just announced at the White House that Armin will be taking Anthony Scaramucci's place.
You're the second person who has said that to me in the last 20 minutes.
Armin, there was a time when you couldn't take your eyes off the sports world. Now it's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
No kidding. I having lived in that nightly news world for a long time, I take pity on the people that are covering Washington politics at the moment because it's we're about ready to get into August. Some people want to take a vacation and break away from it, but I mean it's just a never-ending saga that just shows no signs of slowing down. So, and today with the Mooch, I actually know Anthony not well, but certainly know him and move in some of the circles he does in New York. And man, talk about self-inflicted wounds. So we move on with. Whatever's happening there now from day to day.
No doubt. Well, let's talk about your world for a moment. Certainly, you being a big college football fan, your book a couple of years ago dove deep into the recesses of college football. Anxious to get your thoughts on the upcoming season. I know you have a couple of schools you follow pretty closely.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten interesting. It's almost, from one day to the next, Paul. I mean, just what happened with Hugh Freeze and the last couple weeks was just when you think fact can't approach or fiction can't approach fact, something like that happens, and you're just looking for where the elevator stops sometimes. And I just don't know at this point. Every time I think that we've hit bottom someplace, whether it was what happened up at in Minnesota, or certainly now with Ole Miss and some other schools. Certainly I spent far too long trying to get to the bottom, or not far too long, but I spent a great deal of time at Baylor trying to understand the pathology of what was happening in that program. Sometimes it's hard to believe, and I do, I know with Deshaun and everything that's going on, you cannot excuse in any way, shape, or form what happened at Baylor or what happened in Minnesota, or certainly some of these other sexual assault cases or criminal assault cases. But, let's remember these kids are still 18 to 23 years old, and they make mistakes like a lot of college kids do. And, the off with the head kind of theories that are bouncing around right now, I have difficulty in lining up with that.
I want to ask you, you mentioned Freeze, and certainly it's hard to imagine covering anything at a higher level in the world of journalism than what you have done so well at CBS News and many other publications from this company to Sports Illustrated. But especially for 60 Minutes, and I ask you because I found myself liking Hugh Freeze very much, believing what he told me, and this is, as you know, Armin, we started at a similar time in the business. This is coming from a cynic. We do get taken in by people, do we not?
I have to tell you, I went down there. We were talking about doing a 60-minute sports piece about Jimmy Sexton, and Jimmy being Hugh's agent, and I spent some time at Ole Miss with Jimmy and Hugh just last year, and I was in Hugh's office for about half an hour before a game and 45 minutes or so after the game, and I could see how you could easily get drawn into that kind of that personality. He had, that whole faith, family, football, love my kids, love my family, love Ole Miss. And it was very impressive, and I could see how I know Lars Anderson wrote a very powerful piece about how he got caught up in Hugh's orbit, and that's that just struck me in terms of, and I was taken aback by it, honestly, because I was like, God, am I that naive that that I could get, because I'm like you, I've been around the block a few times, and I can smell BS when I'm around it, and I didn't feel it. I think some of it was because Jimmy was there, and he's gregarious, and Hugh felt comfortable. But in the same token, I that was literally the first thing I thought of, was like, wow, I'm in that camp too. I think in a way, and that's what's scary about this thing sometimes, Paul, is that college football coaches, I think, are the best. College basketball and college football are the best salesmen that I've ever run across in any line of work. They know how to talk. They know how to walk. They know when to say what. They are incredibly charismatic for the most part. I mean, you listen to P.J. Fleck up at Minnesota now, and he could have been a preacher at any level. And that's what he's preaching right now. And some of these other coaches, it's so easy to get caught up in it. And I found myself thinking about Nick and about some of the other coaches that I've been around. And I really, of all the coaches I've been around, I would say that if Nick ended up doing something that really crossed the line, I would be shocked. And I know I'm probably sticking my foot in my mouth right here. Give me a half an hour, right? And the next thing you know, I'll be calling you back saying, "Oh, well, I didn't really mean that." But it's so easy to get drawn in, and especially when you're covering a coach like Freeze day in and day out. You're down there. It's a small town. You get the national media that sort of passes through, does the profile piece, and leaves. And the locals there are as smart as they are and as experienced as they are. They're living that day to day, and it's hard to see the darkness there.
Armin, let me go back to Nick Saban, because you did this piece on him for 60 Minutes, and we talked a lot about it years ago. But clearly, as you know, audiences come and go, and a lot of new people to our program perhaps did not hear you talk about that. But I do want to ask you about being around him, studying him, profiling him for one of the most important, if not the most important, news magazine programs in television history. And thinking about that time and watching him today at 66 years old continue to be at the top of college football.
Well, he evolves. That's what I love about Nick, is that he's not set in any kind of. I mean, the process is the process, but I think the process evolves too from year to year as kids change and coaches change. But I think that's you see so many innovative ideas as far as sports performance and the psychology of winning and what they're trying to teach kids. And I said something today, is I've sat outside Nick's office and waiting to go in to see him on either the Story for 60 or on a social visit, And I've sat in that chair right across from, Miss Linda Leone is chief assistant, an executive assistant, and you do feel like you're in a principal's chair there. And you're kind of waiting for that door to open and Nick to come out. And, and I know some of the kids that have sat in that chair, and as Linda would say, you once is once, twice is you're running on red, and 3 times you're gone. And so I think what Nick has done is he's evolved with how he treats his players and how he counsels his players, and I think that's the mark of a great football coach, and it's a mark of a great person that can, at 66, not be stuck in the mud on my way or the highway kind of philosophy. That being said, whatever happens with Deshaun, there's going to be a price to pay internally, and I think it's going to be, for a public mistake, Deshaun is going to pay dearly privately and painfully, I think, and Scott Cochran will have something to do with that at some point in time. And I think that's okay. You have to understand that, you put a black mark on the program, and there's going to be a price to pay for that. But that's what makes Nick and Belichick and some of the other people that I really respect in the business. They have a philosophy that's rooted and doesn't change about how they coach, but they're so innovative in how they approach the game and how they approach their players. And when you're dealing with 105 kids, being a parent essentially to 105 kids, I mean, I had 2 daughters, and trust me, I wouldn't want to multiply that times 50. And I think that is remarkable, really, that there have been so few major mistakes out of the Bama program.
Armin, I think that was, 6-7 years ago that you spent the time with Nick Saban. Being with him then and thinking about him starting the 2017 season number 1 in the country, did you think he would still be there? And did you believe at that time, if he was, he would still be, like we talked a minute ago, about at the top of his game?
Yes, and yes, I did. And I wouldn't say that about too many other coaches, because it's so, God, it's just so hard to win one, let alone as many as Nick has won. He's just got that something that's different inside of him. It's that how good can I be? I was just, I've been working on this Tiger Woods book for the last 3 years and doing a lot of the writing right now, and there's a parallel there. And one of the things that, even when Tiger won the Masters by 12 shots in 1997 and set a record, or even when he won the U.S. Open by 15 shots in 2000 and set another record, it was never about just beating the field, and it was really never about setting a record. It was about how good can I be? How great can I be? And that's the people like that, like the Bradys of the world and the Peyton Mannings of the world and some of the other just phenomenal athletes you get a chance to run across in our careers. That's the standard for them. They're not really, the hardware and the trophies are nice, but it's really about a pedigree and a historical legacy, I think. And I think that's what drives Nick is how good can I be? How good can my players be? How good can my teams be? And it's remarkable. I mean, he's so fit at his age, and I think that's one thing. He's very healthy. 2, he's got he's got a great partner in Terry, who, without her, I think it would be an absolute, very different kind of a show. And, but as the game has gotten more complex, and it's certainly gotten more competitive, and it's gotten, I think, more treacherous in a lot of ways, he just seems to, he rises above that. There's very few of them that, in history, I think, that you can put on that pedestal. But he's one of them for sure.
Not to sound like your editor, but when's the Tiger book ready to hit the book?
Well, we're turning it in. I've been living with it for almost 4 years, so I'm ready to say sayonara at this point. But Jeff Benedict and I we're coming around the clubhouse turn. We're really happy with where we're at right now. It's due in October, and it comes out next spring. I think next May. but it's been the hardest thing I've ever had to do, Paul. It's just that it's, in a lot of ways it's like a 10,000 piece puzzle that are all the same colors, and sometimes they seem all the same shapes, and you're trying to fit everything together. But I think we have a very good handle on it now, and the writing is that I'm living with it right now, day to day. So sooner, hopefully, than later, I'll get it done.
You and Jeff, of course, the authors of the System, the New York Times best-selling book about college football that came out 5 years ago. Listen, always great to catch up with you, and be well. We'll be anxious to read the book, Armin, when it comes out.
Talk soon, Paul. Thank you.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Dennis Dodd joining us from CBS Sports. Certainly a lot of opinions from Dennis. Dennis, always good to catch up. Before we get into what's going to happen next, I am curious, since we missed a little time, at least on television, your thoughts on the fall of Hugh Freeze, and did you see it coming?
I don't know if I saw it coming. The way it did. The administration, obviously the AD, had doubled down on Hugh, and his demise, if you will, came from an outside source, a person, a lawyer, checking phone records that I'm frankly surprised that Ole Miss had not checked from the beginning of this investigation. I think that might be the first thing you start doing when the NCAA starts poking around. But nevertheless, that it came, it came from that. It came from a lawsuit, running phone records, and as we know, I guess as we all assume right now, nothing to do with the investigation itself, just some questionable conduct.
And as we, before we get to the final question here, let me ask you, what is your sense? You've covered a lot of NCAA hearings. You know how this game is played. Your thoughts on what Ole Miss has now taking to that committee. And I ask you that because a lot of their defense was based on believing Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, it's incongruous. If I'm a member of the committee, of the infractions committee, I would say a lot of your case is based on defending the honor and ethics of a man you just basically fired, at least resigned under pressure. Explain yourself. I'm sure that question will be brought up. Now, the fact that he was maybe going to be suspended because of that new coach's responsibility bylaw is now moot. But they're still going to defend the honor of the school so they don't get another year of postseason or more scholarships taken away.
If you had to guess, and I think the initial thought by some of us, well, maybe this is good, but once you digest that, just like you said, I don't know how it's good for them that Hugh Freeze is no longer there.
Yeah, no, look, it was my opinion. I may have even said it on the show up until the point that he was let go. It was my opinion they were going to stay with him whether he got suspended or not. I was on record as saying I believe Ole Miss would keep Hugh Freeze if he got suspended for a year, because they had gone this far and he had led them to unprecedented heights. Why wouldn't they? And back up their word. So they are, as a coach, as success on the field, they are something less than they were. Now we'll see how that plays out in the future, but the net is they're worse at football than they were.
And let's move ahead. We don't know the key component of this, or two key components, how this season goes, and most important, what the NCAA says. But not knowing that, give us some insight into what Ole Miss could do next.
Coaching-wise?
Yes.
I waited a decent mourning period and posted my candidates today. I think right now Matt Luke's got as good a shot as any. When you consider we don't know what the penalties are going to be, we don't know who's going to be available or who they consider, and the guy that's going to be in front of that administration and players every day, if he has any amount of success, I believe Matt Luke has a heck of a chance. If they wanted to go to a bridge coach, I think a guy like Les Miles might be good. If the penalties are that bad and they go to him and they use him as a bridge coach to the next guy, I think that'd be good. But there's a bunch of guys out there. I don't think Lane Kiffin is a viable option. I don't think I thought at one time Kevin Sumlin was, but then I started to think same division. He's 2-3 against Ole Miss, and I think has lost 3 in a row. So I don't know why they want Kevin Sumlin, who we obviously know is under fire.
Let's talk about Matt Luke. Certainly, of those who don't know much about him, he has all the credentials you need. He has the blood from the family, played there, looks good. What do you think he would need to do on the football field and off, just from a leadership standpoint, to win this job?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a magic number. Obviously, 3-9 isn't going to help, something like that. But I think if he unites the players, unites the fans, the players buy into him. Shea Patterson set the tone, I think, for the players when he came out after the bowl ban was announced and said he was all in. And from that point, I did sense a chip on the shoulder sort of ethic from the Ole Miss players, and certainly that followed up at the SEC media days. I think they have the talent to do well with 5-7, but I think there's a psychological component to this. You know, when there really is nothing to play for, and that's the case at Ole Miss this year. How do you respond on November 1st when you're 4-5 or something like that? I think that story's yet to be written.
And if you look at interim coaches, we just saw one last year, Ed Orgeron, who got the job, even though he didn't do what we all thought he had to do. Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. I just think there's so much to be decided here. You know, I had to check on this, but I thought immediately the next guy's going to get 6 years. Well, as far as I know, Mississippi state law limits public contracts to 4 years. So you could have a wink and a nod for an automatic 4-year rollover. But if it's bad, the new guy's going to need more than 4 years. That's why I raised the possibility of a bridge coach. So we shall see. And I'll end on that note by asking you, guessing, and that's all it is. We know what Ole Miss is self-imposed. What do you think the NCAA, if they don't buy Ole Miss's argument, and certainly a lot of skeptics out there don't think they will, how bad could this penalty be? Well, I think they have to consider that, and then I've written this, so I think it's on the table. They have to consider, or the NCAA may consider, if those phone calls to those journalists violated the confidentiality principle of the investigations. It just happened in North Carolina. North Carolina, believe it or not, had another violation added last week. I know because my story was involved, and they were added by John Duncan, the head of enforcement. So they violated the confidentiality principle, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You're not allowed to talk about the case while it's going on. That could be interpreted, in my opinion, with Ole Miss calling those journalists trying to spin the story. It's always a danger, but it's those things are starting to come out. Dennis, always great to catch up. Thank you very much. All right, Paul, thank you. Dennis Dodd, an interesting look. And I will tell you, I want to talk about Matt Luke, and we'll talk to him later in the week. When I first heard his name, I did not think he could get this job, but his handling of the first week and a half have been positive. I'm not saying he will. His record on the field is critical, but say he does better than expected. Ole Miss picked to finish 7th, has a big win along the way, including maybe one with that in-state rival. Yeah, I could see him getting the job very easily.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
You're not worth a flill.
Okay, Kevin, for the grand prize of $1 million, what color is the White House?
I know this.
5 seconds.
Oh, switching to Geico could save you a bunch of money on car insurance?
Okay. Judges? That's true, Kevin. They'll allow it. Congratulations. You're a winner.
Woo!
Geico, because saving 15% or more on car insurance is always a great answer.
It was BYOG, bring your own guts.
This is the best
Do you hear me?
of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. Bud
Elliott, certainly must must-read, must-see voice when it comes to Florida State football, joining us from Tomahawk Nation. Bud, always a pleasure. Thanks for making the time. Let's talk about this game. It's being billed as the greatest of all time. How's it playing down your way?
Oh, I think folks in Florida State have been waiting for this game for a long time. It's sort of the student meets the master. Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, easily one of the most talented games of the year. If you look across these rosters, and the media guys we got, which of these guys aren't going to get drafted? I mean, this is kind of like one of those classic Florida State-Miami matchups from the early 90s where just almost every guy on the field was a future NFL player.
These two played in 2007. The game, if I remember, was in Jacksonville. It was Saban's first year. Bobby Bowden was still there. There's no point of reference to that game. Saban was just getting started. FSU was ending the Bowden era, or about to end it. What was the anticipation or the desire to have this game again from the FSU side of the coin? I mean, how long has this game been in the works? And I know it certainly Atlanta had a lot to do with it. The people there, Gary Stokan, but when it was announced, what was the reaction?
I think everybody was really excited. I mean, obviously they have a very tough schedule this year already. They have to go to Clemson, to Florida. They're going to host Miami, NC State, and Louisville, but I think things really ramped up after 2013. Florida State stopped the SEC streak when they beat Auburn in the national title game with that huge comeback. But then you heard from other SEC fans on Twitter and whatnot, yeah, but you didn't beat Bama. You kind of stopped the streak by beating somebody who was in Alabama. And obviously Clemson took down Alabama last year. But I think there's still something to that a lot of Florida State fans want a shot at what is the number one program in the country over the last decade.
And you're right. Alabama was number one in the country. Florida State was, remember, they started that season with Jameis Winston against Pittsburgh. It was a controversial year, and we all assumed that game was going to be played. Even after that, though, FSU came back the next year. Winston was still in tow and ran the table all the way up until the Oregon game. I guess it's a pretty safe question to ask. Since then, that game was in the national semifinals. This would be the most eagerly anticipated and the most important since, correct?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, obviously they played some big ones. Last year against Clemson was essentially for the ACC, and they narrowly lost that at home on a controversial chop block call. But yeah, this is the one I think everybody's been looking forward to, certainly since last year. Although when Louisville put 63 on that defense last year that was really confused by Lamar Jackson before people started to figure him out a little bit, I think there's a lot of Florida State fans that want a little piece of revenge on Louisville for that beatdown as well.
Bud, you mentioned the SEC, the streak ending, and it was a bitter pill for the SEC. Of course, since then, Alabama and the SEC has lost to Clemson. I'm curious. We've seen Auburn fans not thrilled when Alabama has played for a national championship. What was it like for FSU fans when Clemson played Alabama? Actually, the last 2 years, but especially last year.
Clemson Florida State is a rivalry, but not really. It's not a nasty one, right? And I think part of that's just geography. There are not a whole lot of Clemson fans down in Florida, and there are not a whole lot of Florida State fans up in Clemson, South Carolina. But at least from my readership, most of them seem to be rooting for Clemson in that game, even though in the back of my mind was, hey, I don't know if Clemson winning the national championship is all that good for Florida State there when it comes to the boost they're going to get in recruiting and the fact that that's a team you have to go through if you want to win the ACC Atlantic, which is consistently one of the toughest divisions in football.
And we had an interview with, I think it was a talk show host in South Carolina, and he said he felt, maybe not this year, but ultimately over the next 10 years, that the sense of Clemson fans was pretty clear, that they felt like they were the heir apparent to Alabama. I'm sure that is not the view among your readers.
No, I don't really think there is an heir apparent to Alabama, right? I mean, what Alabama has done is very unique in my lifetime, and really going back to college football. You don't see teams win, 4 titles now and several other appearances in the playoff and BCS and whatnot. I think when this Bama run ends, we'll probably go back to a little more parity at the top, and that might be a good thing.
Let me ask you about Jimbo Fisher, because while many of us have thought he would be leaving, he has not. We certainly watched the soap opera with LSU for 2 consecutive years. He stayed put. He's probably been able to take other jobs. His name is always mentioned, along with Dabo Swinney's, as a possible replacement to Nick Saban. Talk about his present and future at FSU.
For a while, I thought maybe he would leave, but every time another job popped up and his name would be mentioned, and certainly he has a great agent, and his name was mentioned with a lot of jobs. Every time it was, hey, he's mentioned for this job. I know he wants this building built or that building built or this thing or that thing at Florida State. He's got the indoor facility built very quickly. The academic, center, the new dorms that they just put in. Really, at every turn, Florida State has now given him what he wants, and he's got a deal with 2 options of 8 years plus 2 options, which are, I think, he gets if he wins 9 games. So let's just call it a 10-year, fully guaranteed contract. That's pretty rare in college sports, and that speaks to a level of kind of marriage between Fisher and Florida State that you don't find a whole lot of places. So I don't think he's going to leave. I mean, unless just some big-time NFL job opens up or something.
But finally, it really was Jimbo Fisher a couple weeks ago at ACC Media Days who sent the shot across the bow. Not the first time he said it. Others followed suit about, in his mind, the ACC being the premier conference. Certainly a lot at stake in this game and other games. How did that comment play with your readers and FSU fans, and what is the assessment as you compare and contrast the best leagues in college football?
Well, first of all, I think he was right as of last year. Right? I do think the ACC was the best league. When you look at, you had Florida State, Clemson, obviously national champion, Louisville, and a pretty good NC State team that almost knocked off Clemson. Pitt was decent. Miami had a nice year under Mark Richt. North Carolina was pretty good. But the thing is, I don't know if the staying power is there for the league. I'm sure my readership won't like hearing this, but last year was a truly special year for the quarterback position in the ACC, where they have 4 guys get drafted there and another who was pretty good, undrafted free agent type. You don't see a league lose 3, 4, 5 NFL quarterbacks in a given year and not have a drop-off. So I think he was accurate as to his statement as of last year. And if you got the card, you got to play him. And he was smart to do that, because the ACC might not be the best conference this year. So if you have a legitimate case that they were the best last year, you got to come out there and say it loudly.
But finally, I'm really interested. Plenty of time for predictions later. Not that any of them matter, but I'm really interested in your assessment of this roster at FSU, because I have friends that say it's not a mirror image of Alabama, but it's as close to looking like an Alabama team as perhaps Alabama has seen in a long time. Give us your view of what is going to be on the sidelines when we convene in Atlanta in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. So I run SB Nation's recruiting. So I'm at all these Nike camps and the Adidas camps and Under Armour and whatnot. I'm able to see all the players, pretty much everybody that Bama or Florida State signs, I've at least seen in person one time. Florida State is one of the closest to Alabama. I think Alabama probably has more depth, and they do out-recruit everybody. Ohio State's probably the closest team to Alabama, but physically, I don't think there's another team in the SEC that's all that close to Florida State. I mean, LSU is probably the closest comparison, but, athlete for athlete, I don't think Georgia's all that close to FSU right now, and I don't think Florida is either. So it's basically, if you're an Alabama fan trying to put this in perspective, LSU is probably more developed skill, a little more confidence on offense. Things look a little smoother when they're operating.
Bud Elliott, who founded Tomahawk Nation, always one of my favorite sites, and the recruiting director at SB Nation. Bud, look forward to talking to you as we get closer to the game. Many, many thanks.
All right, Paul. Take care.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Certainly one of the stories we have followed since Saturday morning, the case of Deshaun Hand. What exactly is going on? Until this afternoon, the assumption, that's all you can do when someone's arrested for DUI, was pretty simple. He was driving under the influence. And then here comes a story by Aaron Suttles in the Tuscaloosa News that is painting a different version. Aaron joining us now. Always a pleasure, Aaron. So where are we right now on the hand front?
I think we're waiting Nick Saban's statement, which we did get a release statement, kind of a canned statement from Alabama on Saturday, but he'll be in front of reporters on Thursday for the start of fall camp, and I imagine he'll address it then. Certainly things are different now than they were when Nick Saban put his statement out on Saturday morning when the full details were not available. Bottom line is Deshaun Hand still is going to be charged with a DUI for the foreseeable future, although I do get the sense in talking to several attorneys across Tuscaloosa that any competent attorney will get this pled down to a public intoxication, may get some community service, may get some probation, but I would be surprised if he has a DUI on his record going forward.
Yeah, and you made a really good point. Saban, and listen, I'm guilty. A lot of people are guilty, including Nick Saban, by the way, because in his statement he said this type of behavior is not acceptable. And what he meant by that is a player getting in trouble, and he, at the minimum, it is public intoxication. It's certainly far more grievous to be charged with a DUI. That seems to affect people. But I want to talk to you about the reaction, and I mean, I'm almost sensing from some Alabama fans that it's no big deal because he was asleep. Are you hearing similar things?
Well, yes and no. In that, listen, if I had a child, I would much rather them have made the decision Deshaun Hand made than drive. However, that being said, you would hope that they would remove a vehicle from the equation altogether. And I don't know how realistic that was for Deshaun. I know when police found him, it was 4:30 a.m. The bars in Tuscaloosa close at 2, which, connecting dots, and that may be dangerous for me to be doing here. He may have been in his car for 2.5 hours sleeping before the police found him, perhaps longer than that, shorter than I don't know. And I don't know that Uber, the ride-sharing service, is available that late. But regardless, he put himself in a bad position. But when he put himself in that position, he at least made the more logical, responsible choice in just going to sleep.
Okay, Aaron, you know a lot more than we do. So help us with the geography of Tuscaloosa, where this car was in proportion to where Deshaun was prior. And finally, do we know how much alcohol was in his system?
No, I don't know. I have not received that information of how much alcohol was in his blood, the alcohol content level. But it's an area, what they call in Tuscaloosa, called the Strip. It's if you're familiar with Tuscaloosa, it's by the Publix and the Chipotle Mexican eatery there, and there's a parking lot. He was found there. It's about the 1100 block of University Boulevard, and there are several bars located there. So from what I hear, and he walked from one of the bars, got into his car, turned the ignition because it's Alabama and it's nearly August, and turned the air conditioner on and went to sleep. And talking to several attorneys, Paul, I learned a lot about what they call possession, in that you don't have to have an intent to drive in the state of Alabama. That you can have the keys in the car and still be popped for DUI. It's called constructive possession. I talked to several police officers as well, and one current police officer I talked to said, if you're going to do this, you might want to put the keys in the trunk. And I talked to another police officer who said, well, actually, if we find them in the trunk, we can still get you for DUI. So best case scenario is either to throw your keys away somewhere or just to get a ride home.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I don't know what kind of gas he uses in the car, but a couple hours, 2.5 hours of running the car straight, that's good gas mileage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a weird situation. And again, once you put yourself in that position where you're out that late and your ride, obtaining a ride home becomes decreased, at least he made the decision not to put himself, and more importantly, other people in danger. DUI is a very selfish thing. Not only are you putting your life in danger and people that care about you and love you, but also other people. And so I think that's what Nick Saban was going off of, Paul, when he made that statement. He wanted to be very clear, because when we all see DUI arrest, I mean, we all draw the same conclusions, and that was the only information available Saturday morning was his mugshot, a DUI, and $1,000 bond. And these police reports in Tuscaloosa can be very, very difficult to come by. And anyone that's worked as a reporter here can attest to that. And so there weren't any reports forthcoming over the weekend. We had to wait till today. But I did get the sense in talking to people that this was heading this way. So I made a lot of phone calls yesterday in learning as much as I could about this constructive possession law. It's bizarre, but I think the more people that know about it, maybe we did a community service here by informing people so that it doesn't destroy any more lives, maybe.
Let's move ahead. You said Thursday. It will be an eagerly anticipated press conference by Nick Saban. You've been around them a lot more than most of us. What do you expect?
I wouldn't be surprised, Paul, if he blames the media for jumping to conclusions. It's weird because it's the first press conference of the fall, and so maybe he doesn't want to set that tone. But I do get the sense he's going to put this in his back pocket if he doesn't use it Tuesday to lecture us on responsible reporting and not jumping to conclusion and getting the full story. So I can see that forthcoming. But I can also
by the way, Aaron, has that ever happened before? I'm not aware of a Nick Saban lecturing of the media.
I can attest to several times, Paul, that I've been the recipient of that. So I know the wild card here is, again, it's the opening of fall camp. He may not want to address it now, but I do expect him to at least address the Deshaun Hand. As far as the reporting of it, he may put that in his back pocket and use it another time.
Yeah, I mean, to go off on the media on a Thursday in early August doesn't really accomplish much, does it?
No. He has much larger stages that he normally likes. He's very calculated in that way. You know that, Paul. He uses that bully pulpit to his advantage, and to do it on a Thursday, he may not do that.
Oh, I'm sure he regrets this. This hadn't happened a couple of weeks ago, so he could have used it at media days. At least he would have said something.
Absolutely. He would have had the audience he would have craved for that, too.
Well, don't sit in the front row, although you probably are okay since you corrected some of the misunderstanding.
Well, and I was telling some people today, Paul, when you're a reporter and you have the potential to, any story that you publish that's negative is going to be with that person that's the subject of that report for a long, long time. So I take that very seriously, and I believe that the best thing a journalist can provide is context. And it's not my job to be Alabama's PR person, but if that were my son or daughter, I would want some context added to it. But at the end of the day, he still made a mistake. He still has a DUI. He still has a pretrial hearing on, I believe, October 18th. I got to look up what the exact date that is again. He'll have to answer for that. He made a mistake, and he'll have to answer for that, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, really, Aaron, you said it earlier, but on one level, he's actually been helped. If this had just been public intoxication, there would be no wiggle room for him. I mean, yeah, in terms of the charges, it's not as serious, but the fact that so many people now are breathing a sigh of relief that he was asleep in the car, he wasn't driving. It's almost like this was the first win of the season for Alabama.
It's always that last weekend before fall camp starts, Paul, where you just kind of brace yourself for some of the absurdity that's coming. I didn't expect it with Deshaun Hand because, quite frankly, he would be one of Greg Sankey's poster boys for student athlete. He really came to school to get an engineering degree. He's all about being a student athlete. You wouldn't have seen that from him, but any 18 to 22-year-old kid is going to make a mistake. It's just not all 18 to 22-year-olds play football at an SEC powerhouse and get the headlines, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, that come along with it.
Well, Aaron, we'll have you back because we're going to have an office poll on Thursday. I'm not nearly as optimistic as you are that Saban won't go off.
Well, if he does, I'll be there to document it.
Okay, well, we will talk to that. Aaron, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Great reporting this afternoon, putting a little context on the Deshaun Hand story. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Paul.
There may be some shrapnel flying at that press conference. We'll have it for you live if we can.
Thank you for listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. The Paul Finebaum Show airs weekdays on the SEC Network, beginning at 3 Eastern.